We welcome our presenter, Mr. Shreyas P. Bharule, former scientist, urban location mind. Mr. Shreyas Bharule, an architect urban planner, has a PhD in urban engineering and is passionate about design, food, and photography. To give you some specific jargon, he is interested in almost everything about station area development, urban infrastructure design, urban analytics, and urban regional development. In the past few years of industry experience, as a researcher focused on governance of land use, transport, integration, and transit system planning, such as TOD and TOD management. Currently, skilling in urban analytics and data science application in urban planning.
Welcome to Rail Technology Expo. In this particular session, I'll be talking about how urban engineering can be used in sustainable integration for developing sustainable integration techniques in rail nodes, particularly railway stations. So there are three aspects which I focus on today, which is city development, design augmentation, and behavioral change. So I am Shreyas Bharule. I am a senior scientist at Location Mind, and these are the areas which I focus on particularly, which is station area development management, urban and regional planning, planning theory, architecture, and regional planning. So jumping directly into the topic, uh, if you look at history of Japan. I'm currently based in Japan, so I thought of doing this comparison of how the trajectory or the history of Japan has been in implementation of railways. So, to my surprise, the first railway in Japan had kind of a similar historical background to the first railway line in India, which was between Thane to Bombay. So, what happens in Japan is most of the railway lines here, if you can see on the slide, around 1900s, most of the railway lines were private. So new railway lines which were coming up were mostly funded by private organizations, and they were developing individual nationalized private lines, which were later consolidated into a national public corporation, which was National Railways, Japan National Railways. So this is somewhat Japan's trajectory. In case of India, something similar happened. However, there were several government guaranteed railway lines. So in 1910, you can see that there were several different railway lines which were organized throughout India. And then electrification started happening, and later it was reorganized into individual zonal railways somewhere around 2000. Over a course of 75 years, we have 18 zones and 56 divisions. So this has been the trajectory in India. But going back to Japan, what happened was in 1964, 10th October 1964, the Shinkansen was inaugurated, which is the bullet train, which is something which we are trying to get to India. And the introduction of ticket gates started. So this was advancement into the node of integration. So 1970s is particularly important. Why so? I will talk about it in the next slide. So when we look at Tokyo in 1970s, we have this kind of a density on the platform where everyone is trying to board their train during the peak hours. You can see the timing is somewhere around 8:30 in the morning. So if you look at Dadar, which is in Bombay, the density is kind of similar, like it appears same almost. However, 50 years down the line, Tokyo was able to do this. Tokyo was able to organize its railway in certain ways. There were certain selected cues which were taken, and this is what has happened. However, in 2020, the other somewhat still appears almost the same. So, what are we missing? So, let me go back to the story of Japan again. So, when we look at transport infrastructure and urban laws in Japan, particularly, these are the things which had shocked the country's infrastructural growth. So, there was a big earthquake, there were World War II destruction due to World War II. There was new migration which was happening towards the cities between 1960s to 1980s, and 1990s onwards there was an economic boom which later on burst, and they had a bubble economy problem. So depopulation again started somewhere around 2000. So if we look at the trajectory and try to map what all transport infrastructure investments have happened along this line, what happens is there was a lot of integration which was happening between 1990, which is 1910, where the Yamanote line was opened, and there was the stations were integrated with shopping malls. And in 1927, the first underground subway line opened in Japan, which is Ginza Line. If you ever come to Tokyo, if you ever come to Tokyo, you will see this line, which is yellow in color, and a lot of grandeur is celebrated along it. If you go further, in 1964, the Tokyo Olympics happened, and on the inaugural day, the Shinkansen was introduced, which is to run at 210 kilometers per hour, connecting Tokyo and Osaka in 2.5 hours. So further down the line, 20 years later, the Asakusa Roppongi development, which is actually a station on Ginza line, started happening. And over the course of 10 years, we see the densification within the city. Now, the densification doesn't happen on the go. It has to have policy implications in between. What happened in between was something like this. So transport needs to be coordinated with policy on land development laws, land use laws, how particular consolidated systems, say for example, residential land use can be categorized individually. So here you can see from 1919, almost 1920s, just 7 years before opening of Ginza line, the policy decision was taken of having three particular land uses. Further going on 30 years later, 1950s, some land use like industrial land use was split into two different types of land uses, which was industrial and quasi-industrial. 20 years when the migration started towards the cities and there was a boom going on, there was urban sprawl as well as boom going on. So you required more different types of land uses because the businesses were diversifying, the activities within the city were diversifying. So these kind of new land uses, they help in integration as well as starting up new type of land developments. Further moving on, what this did in terms of land development was, if you take an example of Ueno, which is another station in Tokyo, you can see that between 1940 and 2020, the character of this place hasn't changed, but the urban environment of the place, it has transformed completely. It has new elements. It has new services which it can provide, which is far more inclusive. What happened in Dadar? I go back to Dadar again. What happened in Dadar is the Moti Bazar. It still looks almost the same. We have introduced a new type of infrastructures. We have introduced new types of systems. However, why are we not able to do this? I'll try to answer this in the next slide. Now, what happens in India particularly is between railways and urban laws, we have a challenge. We have a challenge of rail area and city area. So we often see barricades happening between a rail area and a city area. So the challenge is how to integrate railway stations with the urban fabric and enhance the quality of life through urban development around transit nodes. So this is one big challenge. This is also the area where I did my PhD thesis for station area development. Now, what is really interesting is in the past few years, several MOUs have been happening between Ministry of Railways, Ministry of Urban and Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and several different state departments. So this is like a tri-party collaboration happening to do station area development, station monitoring, and eradication of slums and rehabilitation of slums. So this is something which is very important for node integration. Further on, if I move into the area of understanding why station integration is important. This comes from one of my papers, which I co-authored with some of my colleagues, was we talked about the hierarchy of needs of integration of public transport, where we talk about what are the supporting components which actually help or support in forming integration. So we can look at participation of stakeholders, like in the previous slide, I talked about tri-party collaboration. So similar stakeholder party collaborations and long-term planning is critical. So moving on, we after that we have hard infrastructure, which is physical infrastructure. We have soft infrastructure, which is information, which is circulated between the users and stakeholders individually. So, which is generated by the stakeholders and given to the users for ease of living and ease of access. So furthermore, what it does is at the end of it, it does monetary gains for both users as well as the service providers. So users in terms of time savings, you get monetary gains, you reach a place faster, you save a lot of money in that case. And for the service provider, it becomes much more easier to increase the service load. So when we look at quality of life implications, we look at the hierarchy, it also reflects into the same layers. So you can uh, observe that. Now, what happens when we do design interventions? I'll talk about this individually, taking in example from stations in Tokyo. Uh, Firstly, in Japan, the design is defined according to the external conditions, and it is aligned with the goals of the central mission of the core mission of the complete design project. So, for example, if there is a building under construction, they'll also align all the elements along with the core design of this project. Second is they improve the external conditions to fit along with this central goal. So alignment and integration happens here onwards. The third part is to enhance the sense of security. So enhancing the sense of security brings more people, makes them their own, makes the infrastructure their own, and damage to the property reduces significantly. So that is very important. Now, what I mean by liberty, porosity, and rigidity, I'll talk about it individually in the next slide. So moving on, this is an excerpt or this is a picture of as you go from a entry point into the railway station at Tokyo Station. What you get to see here is the interface of rigidity. Now, what happens in our case is we have barricades, we have walls, or we have specific entry gates. So likewise here, when you come across a rigid space, now this is for a subway station. So when you come across a rigid nature of space, an interface which is designed for seamless connection, it helps in channelizing the behavior. Now here you can see that there are not many things which are right in front of you, but only the ticketing gate. So, but naturally, the traveler will be aligned to go to the ticketing gate and not distracted by several different things which are happening. So moving on, this is how they solve the rigidity in Japan. So moving on, if you look at another space which appears like a glass wall or a segregation between two different spaces, uh, is a private space and an urban area. So the urban space is maintained by the city government or the city officials, and the private space is completely privately owned. So here you can see that the elements of private space, which is designed the way it is designed inside, has also been replicated on the outside. So there is a porosity of design. So design elements which are borrowed from the private property into the urban design development that induces porosity. Psychologically, you are not distracted or you are not shocked when you are transiting through this particular area. So these are some design interventions which are pretty common, fairly common in Japan. So here you actually align the passenger or the user directly towards their goal or their destination. And this kind of provides a space because you are transiting. You also get a space to advertise. You also get a space to do non-railway business, particularly advertisements and any other additional information which you want to showcase. Further, moving on, this is something much more interesting because in Japan, the ground space areas are the basement level areas and the ground space areas. They are mainly used for transition when they are connected to a railway station. So here you can see a space which is urban, a space which is private, and a space which is again privately owned or partly owned with PPP kind of structure. So here you can see that the orientation is a big challenge because you have several things happening in front of you. So you get a really nice display on top where you get to align the freedom of a particular user. So here the change of design, it also imparts a sense of freedom, but you are still at your own liberty to choose where you want to go with these instructions. So your own domain is not hampered where you want to go, what you want to do, but you are guided throughout the process. So such kind of design philosophy is implemented in Japan. When we look at long-term implications of the same idea, what happens is we look at space providers. So who provides space? Who provides space which can be designed? So transport infrastructure design provides space. Urban development areas provide space. Station buildings, businesses in station area, they provide space. But when you look at the circular things which are moving around it, uh, consider them as the revenue which they make over the time. So when we look at individual governance or individual management systems which come into picture, you can see that they need to talk to higher authorities or they need to talk to different kind of management systems. When you align them in one particular structure, you can observe that the system of revenue as well as the system of management is interlinked with each other. And you can see that you can see around here, you can see that there are several different waves which are coming into picture. So we can say philosophically or metaphorically, we can say that you will have higher chances of different diversification, non-railway business happening in case of businesses within the station area. So integration with businesses within the station area, they help a lot in creating non-railway revenue. Likewise, within the station building itself, you can develop a lot of different non-railway revenue. So moving on to the conclusions of what I wanted to present specifically today, these are the new emerging areas which can be focused on, particularly architecture and urban planning. These implications and the development which can be done using architecture and urban planning need to be considered with engineering solutions like infrastructure. So we need to include the ways how the needs of users can be included within the infrastructure process itself, not only on the basis of extrapolation of, say, a shift and share analysis or projection analysis of certain numbers, but also the qualitative part of it, the needs-based part of it, into the whole process. Secondly, the number of railway infrastructure projects are heavily increasing in India. We have several different metro projects which are happening in different parts of the cities. We have the high-speed rail project coming up. We have semi-high-speed rail projects coming up in different parts of the country. So a new research methodology also needs to come in where we integrate the railway land with the urban land, and new type of zoning needs to come in. So this will ease out integration in a longer process. The third one is something which will happen, which I understand will happen after we have certain metros in motion, is people flow and crowd management, which can where people can be aligned together and learn from their motion, how they move within these spaces. So there are new areas of data science which help in behavioral studies to innovate urban planning and infrastructure zoning. Now, I would leave you with some additional information about how or where we can start these collaborations with an idea that we need to focus, really need to focus on design of quality of experience so that it becomes a stepping stone for improvement in quality of life. So good infrastructure, nice infrastructure, quality space is also an improvement of quality of life. So we can start that by starting interdisciplinary courses. We can strengthen the survey methodology for urban data collection. And we really need to innovate in the land zoning area with behavioral understanding. We have tried to encompass and keep these ideas within a book called the Handbook of High Speed Rail and Quality of Life. So these are a few ideas which we have already talked about in the book, which was published last year, month of March 2020. So you can also take a look at this one. And that would be me. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you.